Hey everybody, this is Augie here over at Bisexual Queer Alliance Chicago. I am the president of the board of directors here and also co-host of Queer Book Club with our very own Diva Exit Lamore. Just in case you missed out Harrie Farrow back in October of last year, here's your chance to um, check out this interview that we're having, getting to know the author. And getting to know more about their work. Without further ado, I want Harry to introduce herself.
I'm Harrie Farrow. I live in a really small town in Arkansas that actually has a really large LGBTQ population for a really tiny town. We're like a little oasis out in the middle of some very hardcore right wing areas. Um, and I grew up in the Virgin Islands and lived in San Francisco in my 20s. And I'm a writer. I'm an activist. I'm actually an elected official in my county. I had a restaurant for many years, and I think that covers a lot of who I am.
That's awesome. Definitely a Jill of all trades. That's cool. I like that you wear many hats. So, one question that I like to ask a lot of our authors is what's your coming out story? I know for bisexuals, we tend to come out more than once, but I would love to hear your own story.
So mine is, I think, a little unusual in that it was really um, uncomplicated, which I think is super unusual for bisexuals, especially. But I didn't grow up with a lot of restrictions on how to be as a person in this world. My mother was incredibly open-minded, and even I grew up. I was raised Jewish, but the synagogue in the islands, there just wasn't a lot of heavy. Well, for one thing, the rabbi was like in his 90s and or 80s and 90s and spoke in Hebrew with a West Indian accent and no teeth. So I didn't know what he was even saying. So I didn't get like any heavy religious like stuff on me. I didn't have any of that. My family was very liberal. And even though a lot of the Caribbean is really homophobic, I didn't even know that because the island I was on wasn't. And I was born in 1960. So I was also growing up in the 60s and 70s where everybody was kind of more like cool about a lot of stuff. And bisexuality was actually talked about some and like kind of like it was a cool thing, think David Bowie and whatnot. So when I heard the word when I was about 14, I just thought, well, of course, and actually in later years I thought, well, what if I hadn't had all those like okay attitudes about it around me, then maybe I would have not thought, of course. But it just it just seems so obvious and so natural, and I had a long hard time for a long time understanding that not everybody was bisexual, because when you're bisexual you don't understand how it feels to not be attracted to certain genders, like, so I had to over time understand that that not everybody is. And so it was but then very early on, I was in a relationship with a man at age 17. So, and then we were together for 35 years. So we had an open relationship, but mostly it was not open. I mean, it was like I used to joke we were more monogamous than people who say they're monogamous because it wasn't about let's go out and do stuff. It was about, well, we're open to that possibility. So when that relationship ended, my son grew up, I lost my business, and I had this novel that I had written, the first one, Love, Sex, and Understanding the Universe. And when I went to publish that, and all of a sudden, I don't know if you were around back in the early days of the internet, like if you typed in the word bisexual, you just got a bunch of porn right in your face. And it was hard to find any bi community. And so some time had gone by. Online publishing was respectable, self-publishing, and you could find bi community. So I looked for the bi community online so that they would know about my book. And then I started just like writing stuff about bisexuality. And so I kind of came out to my community then because I was assumed straight for so long, and wasn't in very many situations where I had to like counter that for any particular reason. And so now all of a sudden, I was always unapologetically who I was, but now all of a sudden it was out putting it out there more. And so that was sort of a coming out again, but I never really considered myself closeted. So, and again, I just did it without It wasn't like, well, should I do this or whatever? So that was like where I kind of came out to the world more in my community here. Um, and so, uh, and then I ended up kind of getting known to be a bi activist, which the first time somebody called me that, I'm like, what? Because I was writing about it um, and fighting biphobia on social media. So then I started at some point writing articles about bisexuality and for online publications and stuff like that. And I had an interesting perspective because living in San Francisco's in the 1980s, I was very in touch with the LGBT community, and then moving here and raising a kid and having a business and just working really hard and writing a book, I wasn't really paying attention. So I saw this split about how things got better for gay people, but biphobia seemed to be worse. And so I became very interested in what had happened and was writing a lot about that in my articles.
So with my next question, I know you wrote quite a few different novels outside of your articles. First with Love, Sex, and Understanding the Universe in 2014, and as of recently, 2021, Finding Bonita. What was your writing process like with both of those novels? If you wanted to start with your first one, and then if there was like any differences between both of those.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of differences. So the first novel was supposed to be a short story. I was writing short stories and I couldn't make it work as a short story. And I realized it had to be written in the first person from a young man's point of view. And it had to be a novel. And I hadn't really studied novel writing. So that was really like I just had to really figure it all out and it took me a long time and I didn't want to write it. My main character would not leave me alone and like the whole story is told from inside his head. It's you're experiencing everything as he is. So that was just a lot of editing on my part because I do all my own editing, which is, don't do that at home, children. Like don't try that at home. Like, but I'm good at editing, but you're not supposed to edit your own work. But that to me is a huge part of because I want to get like every word just right in every sentence. So that's a huge part of what the craft is for me and what my talent is. Is like getting the sentence just right and really grasping it. So that book was it took me so long, and like I said, I was running a business and raising a child and doing so and I realized I couldn't not write. When I didn't have time, I had to force it into my life. And so that was and that book, the character grabbed me and, once I agreed to do this thing that he insisted I do, I ran with it, right? And then the second book, I'm like, how do I recreate that kind of momentum, right? And that kind of drive to have the story pull me along. And so it took me quite a while. I started writing a lot of different things and I kept coming back to this one idea. And then I finally realized that I had made the main character, because she's kind of traumatized. I'd made her really boring because I made her kind of shut down. But then I realized, oh, I just need to make her a hot mess. And then I'll have an interesting story that's more, the storyline was interesting, but I needed her character. So once I got that, I actually, I was at a rainbow gathering, which is a hippie thing that happens, and I'd never been to one before, and I just tried to imagine my character being there. Like, why would she be there? What would she be doing? And when I wrote that scene, then I got her, and then the story grabbed me and ran. So, but I had started fits and starts on that book so many times, so I had to pull it all together. And that just it was both of those books were really long processes, and I'm hoping this third book I'm working on now will be a lot quicker because it's already grabbed me really quickly. So that's really exciting. And so I'm kind of really into the meat of that, and that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome, awesome. Definitely two different types of writing processes, and then yeah, after not writing a novel for so long, and then having to start on your second novel, just trying to develop that momentum, as you were saying, is really cool. What does bi representation mean to you, and how do you see that, whether it's in music, uh, film, literature, like your own works? And have you implemented any type of representation within your own works? I know the main character in Love, Sex, Understanding is bisexual, but do you have any other bisexual characters within that work or even within Finding Bonita?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when I wrote the first book, I didn't realize um, that I was going to be writing a book that explained the whole kind of bi experience to a large degree, right? And I was just trying to tell this character's story, and he was bisexual, but I didn't intend to like. But of course, in trying to explain his life, the biphobia within the gay community comes out, and how people don't want to accept that he's bi. I refer to that book as it's a story about a man trying to be true to himself in a world where nobody wants him to be who he is. So yeah, I end up kind of covering that whole experience, but that wasn't really the intent. But and then as when I became like a bi activist, then I became much more aware of like, oh, representation is so important. But I knew that on a visceral level, but hadn't really so when I was young, yeah, I ate up any kind of book that had, bisexual characters or even was about bisexualities. I remember, going to the bookstore and like, oh, there's this book that has but ooh, getting all excited, and there wasn't much out there, but there was some, and I held on to that whatever I found. I just recently found a list I had written many years ago on some of the bi books I had. And so, yeah, I mean, it was really important to me. And, one of the reasons why I think I like to write, I want to write the stuff that I want to read. That's what they say to do. And that is it like, this is a book I would love to be able to read, So, yeah, by representation, yeah, Jim in the first book, he's bisexual, and there's a lot of there's several other bi characters, but mostly I'm so focused on his story that they're just all side characters. But yeah, there's several other bi characters in the story, and I think true to life, there are a lot of bisexuals. A lot of times people just don't know that. If you start talking to people, oh yeah, well, or my sister, or yeah, well, I once, and so it's you. Sometimes I think I'm overpopulating my worlds with bisexuals, but I don't think that's really true. And I think also bisexuals kind of gravitate towards each other, so it's not so weird when there's a lot of um and the second book at first, so the first book, the word bisexual is mentioned a lot. In the second book, I thought, people don't say the word, right? So I'm going to maybe make it more true to life and not say the word. But that's really problematic because we need to say the word. And like, so I do say it in the book, but there's more, it's more subtle in the second book. So there's bi characters, but it's not about them being bi. And it comes up here and there and pops up. And there's some characters you realize they're bi because of their life, the storyline, but it's never really necessarily talked about. And then there's some places where it is talked about, and there's quite a few bi characters, and both books have some polyamory in it. So there's that too, and um, yeah, so I really wanted to have that theme in the second book. Um, and so I think I put it in there more than I expected it might be, because I was always trying to find opportunity to like throw something in there. And then this third book also, there's that. It's more like the second one in the sense that it's not about that. The first book is very much about that. So but yeah, yeah, I'm one of those people who has like a list in my head of, buy books, buy movies, like just that I like to, sometimes, oh yeah, have and sometimes it's not even like it's out, not even out there so much. Like I start reading a book like Mysteries of Pittsburgh. Have you ever read that book? I'm like, this book is great. Or Home at the End of the World. Things, but yeah, it's just really fun and happy when you come on upon something that has bisexual characters. And yeah,
That's awesome, and I like that, with Finding Bonita, you're definitely exploring, bi erasure, and making it a bit subtle, and then also, polyamory with different characters. So that's really, really cool that you've explored that in that work, and then it's all out there for bisexuality when it comes to love, sex, and understanding the universe. But that's really cool. The way you add representation of bi and queer characters within your work. So that's awesome.
yeah, thank you.
And so my last question for you is, what kind of works are you currently working on, or do you have any future projects or articles currently that you're excited about that you wanted to share?
Well, I am working on a third novel, and like I said, this one grabbed me a lot quicker. I mean, literally, like I was writing that second novel. I mean, both of those novels took me over a decade, like maybe closer to 2 decades. So this one, I'm like, I really don't want it to be um, taking me that long. So this book, so Finding Bonita, okay, well, Love, Sex, and Understanding the Universe takes part mostly in San Francisco, and then Finding Bonita takes part partially in San Francisco and partially in a fictional Caribbean island. And like I said, I grew up in the Caribbean, so I really enjoyed having that the island feel and the culture and the flora and fauna and the foods. I all my books I talk about. I love to talk about food because I'm interested in that, and like I try to bring alive dishes. And but so I really try to capture the island experience for people, and from the perspective of somebody who grew up there. So it's not a tourist thing. It's not like I went there for a few months or something. I really, so that was fun. So this third book takes place on a second fictional island. And this book has bi characters and has some polyamory, but and has food stuff, but none of the stories they're not sequels of each other or anything like that. They don't have any of the same characters. Um, but this book, I kind of explore the whole issue of cults and how the manipulation of cults without it being like this is a book about how cults are bad for you or how to avoid cults. Because I lived in San Francisco shortly after the Jim Jones thing happened, and he had had his temple in San Francisco for some years. And also the Moonies were huge in San Francisco at that time, and they were very aggressive in pulling people in. And so when I am in college, just a college, age 21 when I got there, and I was going to college, and all these anti-cults information was everywhere I went, like films and flyers and posters and speeches. And so I learned a lot about like how to spot a cult and what brainwashing is and how that works and what it looks like. And so I was always kind of interested in that. And then with QAnon and everything, which actually affected my community here because they kind of targeted the healing community. And the town I live in is there's a lot of like people into everything from crystals and herbs and massage and yoga, and that community got kind of sucked in. So I became even more interested in like studying that. So I have this interesting little cult on the island that figures heavily into the story. And with all my books, I always want to go back to the past. Like the reason why Love, Sex, and Understanding the Universe couldn't be a short story is because I had to explain Jim's past, to explain how he got to be this person in this situation. And so all of my books kind of go way back into the past and explain what happened earlier on, and then and then goes into the future. So I'm having, and I kind of play around a little tiny bit with like the idea of time travel, but not really in this third book because it's just sort of a fascinating concept. So I have my characters family before she's born, and then I have the end of the book, she's being interviewed as a very old lady. So that it's a fun it's I'm having a lot of fun with it.
That's really awesome, and the fact that you're intersecting your own personal history with the cult and then utilizing something as modern as QAnon and the crazy conspiracy theories that, it's created the disinformation, that we see online today and how people are easily so sucked into it and drinking the Kool-Aid and the gin
Yeah.
essence of things. And yeah, that's really cool. When you started the process for the story, were you reverse engineering? Were you first writing the ending, then working your way into the beginning, or how's that process been for you?
So I'm not linear in my getting the information down at all. It's like totally chaotic. I have an idea, and then oh, that leads to another, and then I'm like, oh, and then when she's a child, oh, and then well, if I have that scene in this graveyard, I should mention the graveyard again. Oh, that helps solve this other thing that happened. Oh, and then therefore, so I'm jumping all over the place like I did with the first book. Man, Jim was just telling me his story in every kind of random way, and I realized I had it all in my head, so I wrote it down, but, so things just jump around, so I have already written the ending of this book, because that scene came to me one day, but, I'm all over the place with it, now I've tried to, like, because for a while I was just typing madly, like, "Oh, and then there's this," and then, um, the idea for this book actually came when I showed a friend of mine a picture of me when I was a child digging in the sand with a pencil, and this friend had just read my books, right? So I was like I was already getting ready to write my first novel when I was 4, so I have this pencil in the sand. He goes, "That should be the cover of your next book." And I was like, "Oh," and that's where the whole idea came from. So I just sort of latched on to I use more autobiographical stuff in this book than the other 2, and I use my childhood a lot, although it's really different too. Um, but I latch on to a lot of the being a child in the Caribbean and yeah. So it's I forget what your question was, but no, well, how my process, yeah, it's all over the place, and I've had to like go through, and now I'm trying to like do the chronology of, okay, these are the years before my main character is born and what happens with her family, and then this is um, her early childhood, and then this is when this stuff happens, and this, and so I take all the different things that I've written from the different time periods and kind of order them, even though I think a lot of her childhood will come in flashbacks. But I just have to get some handle on it. Yeah. And then I'll be trying to order them and I'll be reading something I wrote, and another thing will come to me, and I'll be like, oh, no, like, I can't, it's hard to keep it together, so but it's great when it happens that way, so I'm just thrilled to death if I can get this book out in less than, like, 5 years. I mean, that would be awesome.
That's awesome. And yeah, that was the only reason why I asked, even though I had asked about your writing process earlier, is yeah, every writer has a different way about about it, whether it's a skeletal outline or ideas just come at you at different times and moments of inspiration.
Yeah.
Some writers like to write in disorderly chaos, but somehow come up with a concise story. So I was just curious to know how this current project is going for you. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much, Harry,
Well,
for
thank you. I really
taking the
appreciate it.
time to do this interview. Thank you, everybody who's watching. If you haven't already, drop a like on our video. It helps other viewers like yourself check out our content. Thank you so much, Harry, for being here. If you haven't already, definitely uh, consider subscribing for other content on the YouTube channel and drop a comment. Have you read any of Harry's works? Have they been inspiring to you? And thank you for watching again. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.